Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend. This is part 2 of our interview with Tyler Muto. Stick around while we discuss more principled dog training and also while Tyler tells us all about his passion project, ConsiderTheDog.com. He's also graced us with a very, very special gift in the middle of the podcast, so make sure you guys take advantage of that. So with that being said, here we go. One thing I really like was he also made it not about obedience. He made it about state of mind. And I think state of mind was so important to focus on because a lot of trainers weren't focused on state of mind. They were looking at behavior. They were looking at, are you sitting? Are you downing? Are you staying? And, he really, even though he used his very artistic terminology and very spiritual type of approach to
artistic terminology. Sorry, that's funny.
It's simple, but it was really designed to get to your emotion, not necessarily to help you define something, right? It was just he was speaking to people's feelings. And it was great. And I remember growing up and being like, that feels right. But what does it all mean, Basil? Right? So that's when really going into terminology, like finding like Michael Ellis, where he's like, oh, you break something down in all of its component pieces and you go, yes, that's what I was missing. I was missing all the little pieces that needed to get put together to give me the big picture. So that's funny. Okay. So I really liked your answer about principles, right? So it's not so much about techniques and methods because they tend to kind of they tend to just be different ways to do the same thing, right? With certain techniques or tools. So I love that answer about the colors in essence. If we were going to create a visualization, the colors are the principles, right? Yeah. So if you learn the principles, if you're an artist in dog training, you have to learn your color palette. Right. Yeah. But when we start seeing something else, like we start seeing that as dog trainers, we have to juggle so many other variables that are not just dog related. Right. Yes. We have to juggle. I mean, I'll let you guys riff on it a little bit more, but we have to juggle families. We have to juggle the genetics of the dog. We have to juggle what management system that dog or that family is willing to do, et cetera, et cetera. What other kind of stuff do we as dog trainers have to really juggle to try and come up with solutions?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a lot. One thing I did a couple of years ago, and I did it as sort of like an experiment and then also just kind of to scratch my own itch was, again, I was kind of at a point in my career where I was like, God, there's got to be a way to be more efficient here. And especially when it came to behavior problems, the sort of tried and true dog trainer approach when somebody comes in with behavior problems is to let's focus on some basics first. Let's do some obedience training. Let's train the dog and then sort of see
and then use that
how we're doing.
Behavior.
Yeah. Use the train to fix behavior. Or sometimes you train the dog and all of a sudden like the dog's not being a jerk anymore, right? And the behavior problems aren't there. And that's great. And it can totally work. But sometimes it's really inefficient. When we think about obedience, teaching an obedience skill, whether it's sit or down or heel or place, takes a lot of repetition for each one of those obedience skills, right? So when we say, okay, well, first train the dog. So, all right, well, now I got to do 4,000 repetitions of sit, 4,000 repetitions of down, 4,000 repetitions of come. And you go through all of that. And then, kind of see, okay, how are we doing with this behavior problem right now? And that can take a lot of time and a lot of work and for the client, a lot of money. Right. Mm-hmm. And so one thing I did a couple of years ago was I said, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to do some behavior consults. And, most of my job at my training center is actually coaching my staff. I don't actually take on private lessons very much unless I'm covering for one of my team.
Right.
Or I'll be with them. Like they're really the lead trainer and I'm just there offering input.
Yep.
But so what I did was I said, I'm going to do one behavior consult a week, just one. Mm-hmm. And it's going to be the only thing on my schedule for the entire day. The person's going to come in the morning. I'm going to meet with them. I'm either going to have them stay or I'm going to send them away. Sometimes I'll send them away and I'll be like, all right, come back at 3:00, and we'll talk then because I need some time with just your dog. But it was, I only have one day. And how much can I get done if I only have one day? And if I only have this one meeting with the client? What if I could extract, all this sit down, stay, all this other stuff that we're doing to get at the behavior problem? It's not, the dog's not, no longer biting because it learned how to sit. Right. there was something else that happened in the process of teaching the dog sit that shifted the dog's state of mind, or shifted the relationship with the owner, or changed something about the dog's day-to-day experience.
Yeah.
But is there a way that we can extract that out without having to do all the other stuff? And so that was kind of this thing. So I did it for a couple of years, where I just did this over and over and over again. And, sometimes I would have to say, I really need your dog to come in and do a little bit of a board and train. I really need you to come in for some lessons so we can work on some other things. But my success rate of actually getting people to at least like a very much like things are under control. Maybe not like, oh, the behavior problem is magically poof gone, but like, wow, it's like night and day difference. I can live with my dog now. I can manage this thing. And, being able to do that in just sort of like a one-shot deal was really interesting. And what I found was the most important component of that to be successful was learning to ask the right questions.
Yep.
So that initial, like, sitting down with the client, sometimes it was 45 minutes, sometimes it was an hour and a half, and just asking questions about everything. And some of the questions I would ask would seem so unrelated to the behavior problem. But sometimes you'd ask this question and you'd get an answer and you go, aha.
That's the connecting piece.
Yeah. And one of my favorite stories is a client of mine that they had this dog and they had done training. It was a rescued pit bull. And it was really, really leash reactive. And it was a high energy dog, and it had gotten kicked out of a daycare. It wasn't really dog aggressive. Like it was doing well at daycare, but then like a scuffle broke out and the dog jumped in and didn't have good bite inhibition and blah, 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 and got kicked out. But so they did a bunch of stuff with trainers. The dog had obedience and did e-collar and did all this stuff. And like they were like, okay, like the dog is so much more under control, but our walks are still stressing us out. It's still a nightmare. And I'm like, okay, so what do we got to do here? And I'm asking. I started asking about their routine. And, one thing that came to light was, because this dog is high energy, their previous trainer was like, listen, like, you really need to focus on draining this dog's energy. You need to make sure
the whole battery theory, doggy battery.
You're playing tug, you're doing all these things. And so what was happening was the owner was coming home from work, and the first thing that she would do is, get out a toy,
create arousal,
and start playing with the dog, and in a very aroused way. And what I noticed was this dog would come in, and this wasn't one of my behavior consults. This was a client before all of that. And the dog would come in like for day training with us. They drop him off in the morning. We'd do some work. The dog would be doing great all day. And then the owner would show up at the end of the day. And it's like the dog turned into a screaming banshee.
Psycho.
Even before it saw the owner, just when it knew that it was that time of day. And we'd go to get the dog out of the kennel. And it's like every other time I got the dog out of the kennel all day long, it was fine. And this time I go to get her out and she's like a maniac. And that's when I finally was like, what's your, like, what are you doing? Like, what kind of games do you play? Like, how are you draining this dog's energy? And she's like, well, we get home and the first thing that we do is we go outside and we play ball, or if it's rainy, we'll play tug in the house. And I was like, stop it. Like,
just don't do that.
Because you don't realize how your dog is interpreting that message. It's not that the playing tug made the dog aggressive, but what I believe the dog was interpreting is, boy, you must really love when I go into this high intensity state of mind, because when you get home from work, it's the first thing you want to do. It's the very first thing you want to do is do this. So you must love this state of mind, right? And that's how the dog is interpreting that information. So I was like, listen, just put all that stuff, maybe it's not, don't ever do it again, but just put it on the back burner for now. Just stop doing that. And exercise her in calmer ways. There's other ways that you can stimulate the dog and provide enrichment and drain energy that are calmer, that aren't so like that, the pupils aren't dilating to the size of quarters. And so, that kind of like, it's sort of a long digression from your question, but it kind of gets to the heart of it, where it's like, okay, this dog was leash reactive. And no technique in the world that we tried was going to resolve that leash reactivity as long as the owner was still doing that activity with the dog and in that timing. And she can play with the dog, but it's just when you do it first thing, when it's like, before I do I haven't even taken my shoes off, I cannot wait to get you in this jazzed up state of mind. Well, how else is the dog supposed to interpret that? And so that's when I kind of clicked me that, like, I really need to focus on how the dog is interpreting the world around them. How the dog is interpreting our actions as human beings. You see all the time, like, people, they are getting ready to take their dog for the walk and the dog is so excited, right? Like, well, I want my dog to be calmer going for the walk. But then you watch the person And you could tell the person is like, they're so frustrated that the dog isn't calm. And the reason the person is so frustrated is because the person really can't wait to just get on the walk, because in their mind, the walk is the important thing.
Right.
And so what do we have now? We have a human being, right? We have a human being who is being impatient.
Right.
And that impatience is leading to frustration because the human being really just wants to get on the walk. Yet they expect the dog to be otherwise.
Right.
When the dog is looking to you for guidance and direction. Right. And so again, you can do all the teaching the dog to sit at the doorway that you want to. But until you realize that you are also being impatient, that you are also, instead of focusing on what we're doing in the moment now, you're focused on being on the walk. Well, why do you think the dog's so excited? Because the dog also thinks that getting ready for the walk isn't important. They just want to get on the walk too.
Right.
Well, how can I tell my child that they can't have ice cream if I'm licking an ice cream cone in front of them?
Right. Good point.
You know what I mean? But that's what we do with our dogs all the time. I don't want you to be aroused, but the first thing that I'm going to do when I get home from work is get you aroused.
Yep. And then you become a trigger for your dog. Like your dog is classically conditioned to think you want something. You become the equivalent of a doorbell, right?
And it's all that, but what does it really boil down to? Like you just said, classical conditioning, right? So there you go. Coming back to like, what do we need to understand? Well, we need to understand
principles. Good point.
You understand classical conditioning as one of those principles. You can put all that together.
Right. It's always funny. One of the biggest complaints, as I'm sure as you get as a dog trainer, it's like the biggest complaint is the dog's always perfect when you're around.
Yeah, when you're around.
You know? Yeah. And that's the classical conditioning of the relationship, right?
You know what's funny? Sorry, I put it to somebody away one time that I just kind of liked, and it was just it was a riff, but it just made sense in my head at the time, and it clicked with him. And it was because you started, Tyler, by talking about how do we get to kind of how do we go from like, okay, the dog learned sit and the dog learned down, and yet this other issue went away. How does this equate to that type thing? Right. So something that I really try to get through to an owner's head, because of course, especially when we talk about something like that scenario where the owner doesn't get it, like, why can't I rile up my dog first thing? I just want them to be happy. I just want to exercise them. And they think they're doing the right thing. And I can appreciate that. But what's important, I think, to really help them understand is, and it kind of addresses both of those questions, is when you're teaching a dog something, it's not like teaching a dog to sit or lay down fixes things. I've met a million dogs like this one, that know their obedience, but can still be reactive or still be anxious in the crate or still be whatever the case. The key is getting the owners to really key in on the aspects of whatever they're doing that maximize the benefit of that. Like, helping them understand it. And the example that I used was this. When I was living in LA, my little brother wanted to go to the gym with me, and I go early, like real early in the morning to avoid traffic and all that. So he comes to me and is like, hey, can I go with you? So I say, sure, fine. But just so you know, I go really early. And he's like, okay. So, okay, day 1, I wake him up, we go, no problem. Day 2, wake him up, we go, no problem. Day 3, he's reluctant, but we go. And then day 4, he's like, I don't want to go. So I make him go. I'm like, no, get up, let's go. And he's kind of bummed about it. We go work out. He feels good after the fact. And, and I tried to explain to him on the drive home because he was kind of annoyed. It was like, hey, look, you're my little brother. I really don't give a shit how strong you are. I don't care what you look like, but you told me you wanted to go. What matters to me is that you hold yourself to your word, that you're accountable, that you know how to set other things aside that like are excuses that may or may not be valid to just get it done. I know this is what you want, so don't let other things cloud the end result. And when we talk about a dog that's a little too frazzled, or the owner that frazzles the dog, because ultimately you're right, the dog looks to us for guidance. It's important to kind of teach them like, yeah, you can play with them. Sure. I mean, obviously you should. But the way that you approach them matters a ton. Dogs don't really have language like we do beyond the few commands that they can understand. What's the max a dog can know? Like 200-300 words, something like that.
Yeah.
They focus heavily just on routine. And it's like mom comes home and it's go time. What do you expect? I mean, dogs are naturally such hard workers. They want to do what you want them to do. And it can be confusing. Like, wait, mom, you wanted me excited and sorry, but when I'm this excited, I make mistakes. My bad. It's almost hard to blame the dog, but I just wanted to kind of touch on that. And the way that it made sense to me was like, when you're teaching a dog to go through the drills, the reason why that can help in a roundabout way is because in order for a dog to learn how to sit, there is a certain amount of patience and focus and impulse control involved in just doing simple commands. But then you push them with more distraction and whatever the case in order to maximize whatever the end result is.
And it's what I interpreted Tyler talking about is like, sometimes it's just a lot of time for the obedience to be developed so that we can address the behavior, or we see that we have to spend 6 to 8 weeks developing obedience so that the behavior just naturally fades out. But when he was saying that, like you were trying to address specific behaviors without having to develop the complete obedience foundation, right? And being able to successfully manage them or at least help them with that. Do you find that, would you follow up later with complete obedience?
It depends. Yeah, it depends. I mean, there are definitely cases where people would come in and I'd work with the dog. I'd be like, okay, like here's what we can do today, but I really, really recommend that you get some obedience training.
You finish the job, because
without a doubt, there is a value to obedience training.
Right.
I mean, it's again, I don't think that obedience training is always necessary to resolve a behavior problem, but I think every dog benefits from obedience training and every owner benefits from it. And, you know, one way to look at obedience training too is it's a framework, right? So like, for instance, to like use the analogy of martial arts, right? Like when you train martial arts, you're going to do a lot of drills in martial arts that you probably would never actually use those drills in hand-to-hand combat, right? Or like you watch football players training on a field and they're like, you know, they're running through a bunch of tires that are laying on the ground. Well, there's never going to be a bunch of tires in the middle of a football game.
Right.
But they're training their body to be able to move mechanically in a certain way. So when we look at obedience training, what it does is it provides this very tidy little framework for us where the owner can learn, okay, well, if I need to communicate this, here are some ways that I go about in communicating it. So it teaches you sort of like the language or the rainbow of communication in a very structured way. It provides that structure for you. Or like if you do karate, it's like the kata.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's the whole wax on, wax off kind of thing. Like he didn't know he was developing blocks, you know, in Karate Kid. Like
exactly.
No, that's beautiful. I think that's that, and I think that's ultimately, and also, you know, when we're teaching dogs better self-control and patience and impulse control and focus and better decision-making skills, it's like, in essence, we're trying to teach our dogs to be accountable for similar states of consciousness that we are in.
Exactly.
Right? So it's a little bit harder.
And, you know, by the way, like we actually filmed quite a few of those behavior consults that I did, and we put them up like almost in their entirety on Consider the Dog. You know, we edited out, like, obviously there's like a lot of the just like tedious repetitions of stuff, you know, so it's not like an 8-hour long video. You know, we'd whittle them down to, you know, 90 minutes or so, but you can see the bulk of the sessions. We've got quite a few of, you know, some are reactive dogs, some dogs that are a little bit of resource guarding, things like that. And we've actually got them up there on Consider the Dog, which is really cool.
Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about Consider the Dog?
Oh yeah, it's something I'm really proud of. It's a cool website. So it's basically an education platform. It's all video based. We have a bunch of free stuff that's on there, and then there's basically 3 tiers of content. So we have stuff that's free, and then we have a monthly subscription. It's like a membership, and it's, you know, pretty inexpensive. It's $14.99 a month, which is not too bad.
Cool.
And that gives you access to like
Netflix.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. It's like, you know, the bulk of the content that gives you access to that. And plus, you know, with membership, we have like a private Facebook group, and I'm very active on there. People ask questions a lot.
Cool.
And we do other things like that. And then we have some content that's a little bit more robust that we call like our premium content that members get a discount to, but it does require extra purchase, such as like the e-collar course I produced. It's a 7.5 hour long course. We put hundreds of hours of editing into this thing. I mean, it's really intense. So we have a few videos like that are like our premium content, and our members will get 20% off. But basically it's all videos, and it's myself and then some of my friends from around the country that are trainers. You know, I didn't want the site to be all about me, because again, I'm really big on people being able to learn different styles. I am not the gatekeeper to all that is true in dog training. I mean, I have opinions about things. I have ways that I like to do things. My way is not always the best way. It may not always be the right way. And that's sort of like the culture that I wanted to create on there. So we've invited people like, for instance, Sarah Brewski is one of our contributors, and she's primarily a reward-based trainer. She doesn't use any sort of correction at all, really. But she's mega talented and really cool person. And so, you know, we wanted to be able to expose people to a diverse, you know, a diverse sort of group, or a diverse,
like a good menu, like have a strong menu.
And like, you know, figure out what works for you. Right. And so, so So that's basically what it is. I own the site, and so there's a lot of my content out there because I'm fortunate enough that I employ a video person on my staff. So I've got somebody to run a camera for me and do the editing for me. A lot of dog trainers don't have that, and if I had to do it all myself, I certainly wouldn't be able to put out the amount of content that I do.
Right.
And yeah, so it's cool. So a lot of my stuff that I have on there it's really rough. Like it's really like behind the scenes. So a lot of the stuff that's like on the like available to our members, it's pretty raw. We edit it down just for like so that it's not too boring to watch. But we're not. It's not like polished, planned out dog training. This is like I got a client coming in. I don't really know what's going to happen, but let's just roll the camera, and if it seems cool, we'll end up putting it on the site. And then I do have stuff on there as well that is planned out and outlined, and we got the shots we wanted and we put it all together. But there's a lot of pretty raw material on there, which is really cool for people to see, and then they can go on the Facebook group and ask questions about it, and we do some live chats and stuff like that too. So yeah, it's a great website. And
that's amazing. It sounds like a great platform. And now, is it designed for dog trainers? Is it designed for dog owners? What kind of separates you from, let's say, like a Leerburg, right?
The main thing that separates this site from Leerburg is it's really geared for pet dogs.
Got it.
Geared for like behavior. I mean, we do have some obedience stuff on there, but there's a lot of behavior stuff on there. Whereas Leerburg is really targeted towards the like sports, the working dogs and things like that.
Right.
And I love Leerburg. I mean, I enjoyed so much working with them and producing with them. And I was actually supposed to go out there and do another seminar on leash reactivity this summer. And then we were going to film it so they could update the course I have with them. But then this whole COVID thing. But so I still have a great relationship with them. They're really wonderful people. But I wanted to create something like that. And then I wanted to create something that was a little bit more accessible. So the monthly membership is like, it's really inexpensive, and it gives you access to so much content. We actually often will put up, like we just put up a whole course, for instance, from Sarah Brewski on how to get your dog started with the disc dog sport, catching Frisbees and stuff. But it's a really like introductory course that anybody can do.
I'm going to watch that. I'll totally see that.
It's really sweet. She did a wonderful job putting it together, and it is ultimately a premium course, and it's about 90 minutes long. But for our members, we like to do things to sort of, thank them for their loyalty. So, we make it available to our members for like the first month that it's out. And I've got some stuff on there. Like I did a course. I have 2 courses that are available to members right now that are ultimately premium content. But again, we love our members, so we like to reward them. I have a whole course just on resource guarding that we produced earlier this year. And then I have a course on counter conditioning. Both really nice, well put together courses. And so we do stuff like that where, ultimately it'll be something that people have to purchase extra. But for those people that have been with us, that are already members, when we first launch the course, a lot of times we'll make them available so people can view them and check out the material and whatnot.
I love that.
It's pretty cool. It's nice.
Yeah, I'm honestly, as soon as we're done, I'm going to go sign up for a premium account, because you want to know what's funny. It's there's been, I've had a lot of mentors myself, and it's great to do 2 things when you watch other people's stuff, like, and you pay for the content that they've taken the time to produce and put out. 2 things happen. You either go, good, I was doing that well already. Good. Yeah. That's affirming. And then the other one is kind of like it's elevating. And the other one is you see something that you're like, oh shit, that's huge. Like this is the same thing with your leash reactivity video. When I was doing a majority of that video, but the big game changer was the manufacturing of cutoff cues. I was just like, wow, okay, that was a huge game. And it also changed the way I looked at that particular behavior, and it just made me that much better of a dog trainer. So
I guarantee, like, if you watch the course on counter conditioning, it's called the 10 keys to counter conditioning. And I really like the course because we broke it down. It's all broken up into individual videos, so you can navigate it easily. And it literally is, here are 10 things that will make the difference between successful counter conditioning and unsuccessful counter conditioning. And I break it down in a really concise way.
Love that.
And I guarantee you, no matter how long you've been training dogs, I guarantee you that you'll pick up at least one thing in that video that you were like, wow, I can probably speed up my process.
No, I love that.
Maybe that's why it wasn't working for me when I tried it the other day.
Yep.
And it's things that most people have never thought of. And by the way, it's not all stuff that I invented. It's stuff that I
stuff you gathered together over the years, from other people. No, that's amazing. And I think that's the big thing. And this is one of the things, like 20, 30 years ago, this idea of going to another dog trainer and asking them or paying for their advice was kind of like weird. Like everyone had their egos into their business or into their methods. And, I've been doing this for 12 years and, people come to me and pay me for my experience, but man, I'm more than happy to learn as much as I can. I can't tell you how many Learberg videos I have, so
me too.
yeah, me too. Right. And this is ultimately what, becoming a professional dog trainer should be. It's us striving to be better, striving for us to help as many more dogs, because I think you have a similar background story, but like for me, I started in dog shelters. I started really, the purpose I got into dog training was to prevent dogs from having to die in shelters. Right. Yeah. And that's a huge motivation for me. And it still is a huge motivation for me. And there's a lot of people, especially in LA, where we're at, there's a lot of homeless dogs. And there's a lot of dogs who are in our shelters. We have about 6 city shelters and a few county shelters that are completely packed. And it's nuts. So awesome, man. I'm super excited to sign up for Consider the Dog, right? ConsiderTheDog.com. What's the website?
ConsiderTheDog.com.
ConsiderTheDog.com. I'm signing up for that as soon as we're done with this podcast.
It's funny because when you were saying that, I was thinking the same thing. I was like, I'm already on the website just looking. I was like, okay,
No, it's cool. And I put a lot of thought actually into the name when I was planning this whole thing. I went back and forth, with my wife and trying to figure out what's a good name for this thing. And what I love about that name is it sort of has dual meanings, right? So to say, hey, like, consider this for a minute, right? Like, it's like, hey, like, let's think about this for a minute. Like, let's delve into this topic, right? And so there's that aspect of it. But then there's also like to be considerate of, right? Which ties back into that empathy kind of thing, to be able to see the world through somebody else's viewpoint. Actually, one of my favorite videos that I've ever produced is on there. And again, it was a very impromptu thing. We had a dog in for training that was a pot cake dog, one of these dogs from the Caribbean that's like feral. And, had a little bit of a bite history, or actually don't know if she actually had bitten anybody yet, but it was,
it was obvious she
escalated to that point.
Yeah.
Obviously very fearful dog. And, she had just come in, my staff was like, hey, can you help us? We just want to, have some direction what to do with her. So I was like, all right, let me get her out. And we just decided to, roll the camera. And I didn't have a plan for what I was going to do, as we've been kind of talking about. I just sort of let things happen. And it's just my first session with the dog. Well, you can see how things evolve from this dog snapping at me and growling to this dog, I'm laying on the floor with the dog, and she's.
Is that the one where you're hugging her? There's like a point, or like you're really down low on the ground. I remember. I think I saw a snippet.
Yeah, I think it's a free video. I think it's even on YouTube.
Yeah,
I don't think it's behind the subscription. I think anybody can go on there and watch it. In fact, I can pull it up right now so I can get the title for people.
Yeah,
if they wanted to check it out.
Yeah, I think I saw a snippet. I believe.
Yeah, let me just pull it up real quick here.
But you were talking about like we have to pay attention to how she's feeling, and I need to generate the energy that I want her to feel. Like you were saying something along those lines. I remember.
Yeah, it's a really cool video. It's maybe like 15 or 20 minutes or something like that. Let's see here. Pretty sure it's in the free videos section. Just scroll back. Apologize, guys, for the delay, but it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it. It's a really cool video. Yeah, it's called Connecting with a Fear Aggressive Dog. And it's about 14 minutes long. And it's just a session with this dog. She was a really sweet dog. It just kind of shows how I go through sort of assessing what's going on and then just sort of playing around and seeing where things go. And it worked out really well. And there's a lot of stuff on there that's like that. I have another video on here. It's free. It's called Connecting Emotionally with Your Dog. And it's from a seminar I taught where, the way the person was praising the dog didn't really match the way the dog was feeling about the situation, things like that. So there's a lot of cool stuff on there. It's a fun website. And I really enjoy it.
And that kind of shows a lot to, again, that matrix of knowledge is because, again, people are so focused on the physical behavior, being able to focus on the state of mind, being able to focus on, what it is that dog needs, at least in that lesson, right? Like so many times I work with insecure rescue dogs who are shut down for the first 3-4 days. And, you know, the way that you treat them in the beginning is very different than a week later, where they're peppy and bouncy and goofy and they feel comfortable to start pushing your buttons a little bit, right? So we kind of start seeing that. But I think it's this is a term that, you know, that Mariano says a lot, but he goes, dog training sometimes is like a moving target.
Yeah, all the time.
It's always a moving target. And it's like you're trying your best to, as it's evolving and as the dog's adapting and as the environment's changing, you know, again, there's we kind of to kind of bring it back to our original question, there's like all these variables that we are trying to balance in dog training, that it's a moving target. And when you have a living, breathing, thinking creature, sometimes they actually, you know, they keep you on your toes. And I think that's the beautiful part. And if you can create those skills that I'm so excited to look at Consider the Dog and just kind of see, you know, how you're approaching certain situations, because I want to add as much as I can to my own repertoire.
I just signed up right now. you know what's funny is that I was like slow typing on my keyboard, so it's not like a click, click, click. But you know, it is interesting when you talk about like, the moving target. I love that whole thing. And like when we were talking earlier, you know, about just how do you make things make sense to the client? Because obviously, like, you know, Tyler can talk, you know, about this stuff in crazy detail. I mean, with all the wealth of knowledge that he's earned over the years, and, you know, it's like, how do you then streamline that to what the client needs to know? Here's how I can directly influence your next, you know, you don't want to throw too much at them. So it's like, okay, go home lesson number 1, this, and then so on and so on. That's always been, or at least right now, like in my career, that's where I have the most fun trying to figure things out. Like right now I have a foster dog. I work with a couple rescues here in the Phoenix area, and one of them is feral, like feral. And he's feral dog number 3, because we have lots of feral dogs coming from like nearby, you know, Native American reservations or just on the streets and things like that. And so he had to be like trapped in like an animal trap, and, you know, and it was this whole thing to get him going. And, you know, we have had him now for like a month, and you would never know. You know, we just did a couple walks, you know, these past couple days with his new dad, and it is interesting. I mean, and I bring him up to say that the whole moving target, and, you know, kind of Brent was talking about like just evolving with the dog through the training process. And for him, it was this whole like domestication process before the training process, and just building any kind of trust with people whatsoever, you know, before I could even like treat him like a board and train.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And one thing I've had a lot of fun talking to the dad about is, as the dog moves through their phases of training, you kind of learn when to like ease up, like on the gas pedal, so to speak. So one thing that I get asked a lot, like there is the whole Caesar question, but the other dog trainer question is like, oh my God, you're a dog trainer. You must be so patient, you know? And I tell people all the time, like, yeah, but it's also important to know when to not be that patient, and when to like, it's okay to kind of set boundaries for dogs and really help them understand certain things that they shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And also,
or when to push them past the plateau.
Exactly.
Like it's time to, like, you know what, like I need to put a little bit of pressure on this dog. I need to, because it's in their own best interest, just like a kid, you know, just like a child, you know.
Real quick, I wanted to take a quick pause and just let everybody know who's listening that Tyler has actually given us an exclusive promo code for ConsiderTheDog.com. So if you guys are interested in starting a new membership, you guys can go to ConsiderTheDog.com and type in promo code DTP 2020. It's DTP, like Dog Trainers Podcast, DTP 2020, and you guys can save over 65% off your first month's membership. Okay, cool. Just wanted to let you guys know we're going back to the podcast now.
Well, and that's
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, that's what brought my head to this dog, because before I got hands on him, the rescue themselves, they had him for like 5-6 weeks, something like that. And he just couldn't, he was like he's like a really sweet, really good with other dogs. And he'll come right up to you, tail wagging. But the second you reach out to touch him, he's gone. The second they tried to leash him, that leash was bitten through like in a second, and no crate, no nothing. And so they couldn't get him like vaccinated and stuff so that I could get him to my place, you know, where we've got client dogs and things. So it took them a long time, and they were like, Mariano, like, why is he not opening up to us? Like, why is he just as bad as he was like 5 weeks ago? I don't get it, you know? And they were consulting with our big network of like, you know, they just, in the rescue business, you know, people, vets and other rescuers and other trainers and things. And I told them,
confusing themselves.
Yeah. Well, you know, but I told them exactly that. I was like, essentially, he's gotten to about where he's going to get right now without you kind of pushing him in that direction. So let's get him, you know, like on a leash, let's get him to the vet. We had to kind of wrangle him into a crate, get him over there, and then they had to like, you know, put him to sleep for a bit so they can get everything done to him, like fix him and microchip him. We got him to the house, and then once I got a leash on him, we just start pushing, and of course he was nervous, so I had to kind of play with the like fundamentals of training a little bit. This dog was not excited about taking treats from me, so I started with like really low level leash work just to get him comfortable and not like you pull, and I'm talking like a hair's breadth, hardly touch that leash, and he immediately jolts the other way.
Bronco,
yeah, exactly.
Bronco.
Right.
Yep.
So once we got him going through that, and he was understanding like, look, I at least can go through this and I'm okay. I need to learn how to just chill. Then food work became an option. Then we moved on to e-collar stuff and desensitizing and bringing him out and teaching the new dad about proper like socialization and how that's a moving target. But that's a lot of fun, you know, knowing when to pressure a dog can really open up their world.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we had an episode talking about our, you know, how to phase through training, and it was mostly for like young dog trainers who don't know when to, you know, get on the gas pedal, get off the gas pedal. And, you know, we were just kind of given some instruction of when to know, right? If I were to ask you that question, Tyler, like when would you know, like what are some telltale signs that you could say, okay, we are ready to start, you know, whatever the gas pedal means. It could mean applying pressure. It could mean, you know, now we can give the dog more freedom. Now we can have to take some freedom away, like whatever it might be. What are some signs in your work that are very obvious to you to know when to move on to a next phase of training?
Yeah, that's a tough. I don't know if I can answer that question.
Yeah, I guess it's very broad.
There's definitely. I mean, so like there's times where it's simple as far as like when to move on, right? Like, yeah, like if I'm teaching something new, like I'm teaching obedience, there are definitely like standards of, okay, when my criteria has been met, you know, I know to like push things a little bit.
Yeah.
But as far as like if I'm working with a behavior issue and sort of, you know, like you guys said, when to put your foot on the gas and when to take it off. I think really for me, what it comes down to is, again, like really just listening to the dog, like listening to what the dog is telling you.
Right.
You know, we've got a dog in right now that's with a rescue. He's a deaf pitty, and he's bitten. I think he's bitten like 7 people now. Like really, he's up there. But he's really very sweet, and you could tell he's just nervous. And he's been with us for, I don't know, 3-4 days or something right now.
Right.
And you know, all we're doing right now is just, you know, I feel like he's gotten to where he is because, again, he's deaf, so he can't hear you anyway. And the average person, by no fault of their own, it's just not common knowledge, doesn't really know how to really use their body in a very intentional and clear way with a dog.
Right.
To show the dog not only what they want, but also to show the dog that they understand what the dog wants.
Right.
And I think that latter portion is really important. And you'll see a little bit of that in that video that I was just talking about, the connecting with a fear aggressive dog. You'll see a little bit of that where I very purposely will do something where I'll, like, for instance, turn into the dog with a little bit of spatial pressure so that the dog can say, like, oh, hey, that makes me uncomfortable. And that I can go, oh, that makes you uncomfortable.
Oh, so sorry.
I'll back off. And the dog goes, holy shit, you listen to me?
Yeah.
Right?
To give him some control back in the situation.
But I have to put the dog in the situation where it wants to say, hey, please stop, so that I can go, oh, yeah, that's cool. Like, I'll stop. Right?
Yeah. That develops better trust. Better trust, for sure.
So that early stage is less about me showing the dog what I want and more about me showing the dog that I understand them and that I'll listen to them.
And I speak your language. Yeah.
And once I learn how to listen to the dog, the better I am at listening to the dog, the better I know when the dog can be pushed and when they can't.
Right.
You know,
great.
Appropriate when it's not. I think it's less about when to push and like way more about like when not to.
Yeah. That's a good framing.
You can push until the dog says, like, hey, like, I'm stressing a little bit.
Right.
But, you know, I also think that we have a tendency as humans, and we all have this tendency, and this is whether we're working on obedience or behavior, to feel like if we don't see the problem, we're not fixing the problem.
Right.
And so, like, every repetition, we tend to push the dog right to the point where the problem is tangible. The problem is visible. And one thing that I stress so much with my clients and with other trainers that I coach is that the successful repetitions are the ones that really matter.
Yes.
Right. So, okay, let's say the dog's reactive, and I know that if I get the dog to, 30 feet away from another dog, it starts to, tense up or whatever.
Right.
I can see the dog stressing.
Right.
And I go, okay, and I work a little bit, and then all of a sudden I go up to 30 feet and the dog doesn't stress. Our tendency is like, okay, well, now we got to go a little bit further.
Right.
Why don't you just sit there and do like 10 or 20 reps at that point that the dog used to stress at, but now they don't.
Right.
And let the dog just have that new experience and realize that that's setting in a new memory. That's setting in for the dog that, hey, there is this other way of existing. Exactly. And that's true even when you're just doing, like I was working with a client today whose dog is really pushy on the walk, and it can be also very dog reactive. So we were working on teaching the dog to walk behind us, which is something that I love doing. And, we're kind of doing like a starting and stopping drill. So you come to a stop and, you obviously don't want the dog to go in front of you. And,
are you using leash or e-collar at the time?
Neither. Actually.
Oh, cool.
Neither. Yeah. I have my secrets.
Okay. You gotta pay for that.
Honestly, right on. We use a lot of spatial pressure for it.
Nice. Okay.
Pressure. And then one of my favorite tools for teaching dogs to walk behind me is actually just a squirt bottle with water. Cool. It can be, if you know how to use it right, it can be an extremely effective tool.
Right.
And really easy for the owner to use. Like no technique necessary kind of thing.
Right.
So, we do a couple reps and the dog gets a correction and then the dog does good. And I was like, okay, cool. So now, like, I want you to just keep taking one step and stop and one step and stop and just let the dog do good. Like, don't move on from this. Let the dog realize that, hey, wait a minute, when I stay behind you, like there's no little squirt of water on my nose. Oh my gosh. But if we never let the dog have those experiences, they just think, oh, okay, so this is what happens now. Every time you stop, you squirt me on the nose. Okay, great. Yep. Right? They never learn that, like, oh, wait a minute, there's an alternative that doesn't result in that behavior.
Right.
And maybe the dog gets one rep of not getting squirted, and then we push them to their limit again, so they make a mistake and they get squirted. It's like, no. For every one time that you correct the dog, for every one time you push the dog to their stress level, get 10 reps in where you don't.
Right.
You know?
Condition that.
Yeah. So that's kind of for me the okay, so I got all these successful reps in. Okay, so now let's push a little bit. All right, we pushed a little bit. Now let's back off. Let the dog feel the success. Okay, we push a little bit. Then we back off. Let the dog. I like the dog to win a lot.
Yes.
I like the dog to learn where their advantage is. That's something that, Bart Bellin used to talk about a lot. He says, every dog is going to do what's in their own best interest. You have to help the dog learn where their advantage lies.
Right.
And so often we don't do that. We just push them to their limits over and over and over again.
The dog's always under stress. He's always under stress because we're always pushing.
Always. Yeah. The key to the successful use of punishment, for instance, is not the punishment itself. It's when the dog learns how to avoid it.
Yep.
Right.
And the dog those reps in where they can consistently avoid and get confident in their ability to avoid.
Yeah.
And that brings up a good like rough kind of estimate that I, because I like that a lot. A person that I trained with here in Arizona is Sean Thomas, and he's a good dog trainer, and he owns a kennel here in Gilbert, Arizona. But what was really amazing to watch was he's amazing with like Schutzen work, and his personal dogs are just on point all the time, and he runs like a club out of the, like after hours out of the kennel. And the way that he breaks it down to clients is he'll draw on a little whiteboard, he'll draw like a triangle, and he'll kind of split it into like 10 little segments with a marker. And he'll say, okay, so here's people's problems when it comes to dog training. We're talking like the average owner. The bottom of the triangle is obviously the biggest, and the top is the smallest. And people's goal is, I want my dog to stop reacting to other dogs when I walk on a leash, blah, blah, blah. And he comes up with this end result, and he puts a little dot at the top of the triangle. And he says, they always seem to undermine the importance of the foundational work, which naturally in the triangle is the biggest part. They just want to, and he would draw little things like plus, 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 minus, plus, plus, however many of those fit within the bottom, segment of the triangle. Let's say it's like 10. And he would kind of make it a point to be like, look, each and every one of these repetitions, good and bad, are valuable. They're learnable moments for the dog. But there is kind of that point of like diminishing return where if your dog is failing more than they're winning, you're doing something wrong. You need to back up. And you need to slice thinner segments into the triangle and really start to figure out and dissect what is the variable that's giving you trouble right now. And so the way that I kind of play with it in my head is like the ratio I look for is like 70-ish%. If the dog's winning 70% of the time, I'll let them win, do a good job. And once they're kind of there to where they're doing it pretty much all the time, like easy, then you push them back enough to where it's about 70% again. So they're still earning. They're still like floating, not sinking, so to speak, but it's a little bit of a challenge again. But I definitely agree with you that a big issue that I have in dog training these days is, regardless of training method, it's more just, it seems like people really like to market now, like, I can off leash train any dog ever in 2 weeks, period.
Oh God,
You
yeah.
know, and and I'll find a lot of people call me and they're like, yeah, well, I spoke to somebody who said this, and this, and I'm like, that's okay, but there's something to be said for just sheer repetition. It helps. Let the dog be good at what they do, and just giving them time to just go through over and over and just really ingrain it. It's like we were talking about, like anything else, like a martial art, and and that's when you get comfortable enough to play with something, but it doesn't happen in 2 weeks.
Right.
No. And what does happen in 2 weeks is not the same.
That's
right.
That's what I want to talk about. Actually,
it's just not the same, and the owners would not want to see what their dog's emotional state was through that process.
Right.
Just wouldn't.
No.
The process matters. How the dog feels about it matters.
Right.
And I mean, we used to do 2-week board and trains, and we would do a lot of follow-up too. And I got to a point in my career where I stopped even offering them. I was just like, I just don't. I feel too pressured. I feel like it's just not the way it should be, and I just stopped doing it. But yeah, that whole, like, I guarantee off leash. Well, guess what? That's what's supposed to happen if the dog's midway through week 2, and the off leash isn't working, but that trainer just guaranteed you. So they have a financial incentive to make sure this goddamn dog comes when called, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do not want to see the level of pressure that's going to be put on that dog.
No.
Yeah, and I've seen.
I don't do guarantees, because this isn't fixing a washing machine. This is a living, breathing animal with feelings. You know what I mean? Like, no way, man.
Yeah, it's interesting because people. I've seen a lot. Like, I've seen some of this stuff. So just as a, I'm not here to, like, mention anybody in a negative light. But when I first moved to Arizona, because I've only been here like a year, I'm from LA too. When I first moved here, I didn't just move here like with no clientele or anything. I was looking around for a job at a kennel just to hold me over while I built my whole thing. And so I met with a couple different places, and one of them was one of these kinds of places, like 2-week, any dog, e-collar, just period,
And then pop them out the other end. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I when I met with them, we were just talking, like, they were interviewing me. So it was like, okay, well, do you know e-collar? I was like, yeah, and I was like, okay, so you guys, and I just kind of talked them through what I thought their philosophy was going to be. Like, okay, so typically speaking, if the dog's into it, you'll start with food or a toy or whatever the motivational thing is to shape behaviors. And then once the dog understands, then you can start putting a little pressure with e-collar stuff. And then from there you build to, like, bigger and longer and, outside and distractions and blah, blah, blah. And they were like, actually, we just do, like, straight e-collar, like, the whole time. From day one to day. And I was like, but then I thought of some, like, there are really high level e-collar guys that I can think of online that are like, e-collar work is subtle, but you can start a dog on e-collar. It may not be like the optimal tool, at least not all the time. But I'm like, okay, so that's doable. Okay, no big deal. I'll get to sharpen up my skills. It's been a little bit, since I've had to do like that. But they were like, yeah, we're really not too much like into the food stuff. Like, we want the dog to be 100%. Like, the guy was kind of like hard with his words and everything, and I was like, yeah, but how can you guarantee that in 2 weeks? And we were talking like one of the owners, this is after the fact, one of the owners that I spoke to that were considering this person but ended up training with us instead, was their dog was like 4 months old. It was Adobe from Germany, 4-month-old dog, and they guaranteed him in 2 weeks. And I was like, yeah, that's bullshit. I'm sorry. I don't care how good these trainers are. I wouldn't trust a 4-month-old dog on an off leash for anything.
Right.
At that point, it's just like proper parenting.
Dog, like their brain's not even fully developed.
Exactly.
No, you're gonna mess them up. I actually had, funny enough, Doberman, 4 months old. One of the guys, I had a friend who invited me over to their friend's house who lived out here at the Venice Canals, and he knew that I was a dog trainer and I was coming over. And I said, oh, maybe we can talk dog training. Turns out the dog just came back from a 2-week boot camp. And the dog's 4 years old or 4 months old, still had posts in his ears, right? Or her ears, right? And the dog, he's like, oh, he's so excited. He goes, the dog just came back like 2 days ago. We're so excited. Brent, tell me what you think. So I look at the dog. Now the dog is barking and screaming at me at 4 months. She is pissed that I'm in her house, barking, really stressed out. Just, if I come close to her, she's like running away. And in the midst of this, he says, he goes, tell her to do something. So I'm like, no, dude, your dog's stressed. And he's like, oh, fine. And he goes, lay down. And she lays down immediately, very robotically. And she's still barking at me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then he says, come. And then what she does is she ends up kind of doing like a side, doesn't want to take her eyes off.
Doesn't want to turn around. Yeah.
Show me her back. Because she comes immediately while she's not even looking at the owner, still engaged on me, and comes. Yeah. And so it just to go think about how much pressure was put on that little tiny puppy just to get a result.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, I mean, I have friends that do 2-week board and trains, and it's not to say that like no dog can ever become off leash trained in 2 weeks. Right. Like for sure, there's some dogs that are smart as a whip and they pick up on it quick.
Yeah.
But this whole like any dog,
right, regardless of anything.
And again, even like not all guarantees are the same. I've got colleagues that do guarantees, but it's like
follow up.
It's a very open-ended guarantee. You know what I mean? It's not like, there's follow up involved, right? But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some stuff out there for sure. I mean, I did a workshop at a place that it was one of these places that do like, any dog 2 weeks, and they had, I don't know, half a dozen dogs that were all slated to be done within like a few days of the seminar I was teaching. And I was like, all right, like bring out the next dog and show me what the dog knows. And what they said the dog knew and what the dog actually knew were two very different things.
Right.
But every single one of these dogs, I mean, so like, well, perfect example, like this one young lady, she'd bring out a dog. They've got this like box in the middle of the room that they were teaching dogs to place on. And she'd go place, and then she had the e-collar, so she'd stay place and press the button like basically at the same time. And then she, used the leash to kind of get the dog up on the place. And I was like, okay, cool. So like this dog's like just starting e-collar. She's like, no, this dog goes home in 2 days. And I'm like, what? I was like, well, okay. I was like, for now, like stand still, don't guide with the leash, and just stay place. And when she did that, and the dog had the slack on the leash, you know what the dog did?
Go the other way.
He tried to run.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, he tried to get the hell out of there.
Did she? Sorry, can I just ask? So she didn't move, but did she jump on e-collar pressure?
Oh yeah. Right.
Oh yeah, and he tried to run away. Okay, yeah, that's one. That's a gripe that I had. Go ahead. Sorry.
I made them take all the e-collars off the dogs for the workshop. And we just reworked all the dogs without e-collars.
Nice.
Because the e-collars on the dogs were just so stressed out, and I was like, I can't. This is not workable. Like I can't do anything with this. There's nothing. I can't help you fix this.
What were you there for? Just to lecture, to guest, to teach, to enrich?
It was like a 3-day. It was like a 3-day hands-on workshop with a group of people, and we were going through basically dog by dog and just giving pointers and teaching how to improve their skills. Yeah.
Awesome. That's great.
Like kudos to them for like actually taking the time to
invite someone in. Yeah.
But some of the stuff was bad. Like it was bad, but that's how they had learned from the place that, ran the company. And I was just like, wow, like this is, oh my gosh. Like I feel horrible for any dog who's here right now. And what was so alarming was they didn't see it.
Right.
They didn't see the stress. And my friend Chad Mackin always says, normal is what you're used to. And they were so used to seeing dogs that were like on the verge of shutdown that to them that was normal. Like to them, they thought these dogs looked good.
It's like learned helplessness is normal.
Ready to go home.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. Don't get me started.
This looks good to you?
Yeah.
Holy Christ, man.
Yeah. And you know what's so funny? It's, I mean, again, starting in a Keeler method, that I remember those days. I remember those days where, avoidant dog was an obedient dog. And it just gets to this point where you're like, it just doesn't make sense anymore, or it doesn't feel right anymore, know?
Well, I think that was a big game changer for me too, because same here, I definitely learned like mechanically the ins and outs of how to work tools before I really completely understood how to not just get a dog to complete commands, which is what they were doing, but how to get a dog to like the process and how to get a dog to the point to where you're pressuring them in the sense that like you're asking them to do things that are challenging because it's a training environment, but they're not pressured in the sense that they're worried about making a mistake, and then they're open, and then you find that they make less mistakes anyway. It's like this weird catch-22, and it's tough. It's tough to teach that kind of thing to someone. It's like, push the dog. Yes. Definitely engage them and help like spark that creativity and that work ethic and everything, but also don't like helicopter the dog. If they make a little mistake, okay, kind of let it go. Like you have to learn the ebb and flow of training. Of not everything needs to be rigid all the time. And we really talked about this a few episodes ago when we were talking socialization, because that's something people get wrong a ton. And there was a client that I have right now who's a private lesson client who has, it's like a shepherd lab mix, and the dog must be like 7 or 8 months old. And he's big, super like wobbly, like labby, and very social, great at dog parks and with people. But there's one dog in particular that he just does not like on the walk. And we go for our first walk. This was like 2 or 3 lessons in. And this dog is great with anybody else, but he sees this other dog. It's like this giant pitty behind a fence, and they just are barking at each other back and forth. And the owner is like, well, what do I do? Do I sit him and make him stay here? I was like, no, like, why? You know? And and he was so tied to this idea of like, yeah, but shouldn't he be able to like walk by dogs without reacting?
Regardless of what's going on.
Exactly.
That he used to always say, I don't care if a bomb's going off, the dog should stay on place.
Yeah. Right.
Like, no, he shouldn't.
Yeah, he should run.
Right. Get the fuck out of the way if a bomb's going off. You're right.
That's a harder thing to do.
You know, like in my course on Learberg, the leash reactivity course, I talk about something that is very much at the core of a lot of what I do, which is called obedience with exception. It's like, yeah, it means stay there regardless of distraction, except, you know, hey, you're feeling threatened by something, like by all means, walk away.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, here means stay on my left, but there's something on the left-hand side that's making you real uncomfortable. By all means, go to my right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, don't just go to my right because you think there's something over there that looks interesting. No. Like this obedience is obedience. But hey, if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling uncomfortable, and this is your way of avoiding conflict, I'd way rather you walk off a place and walk away from that kid that's running towards you than feel like you have to scare the kid away.
Right.
Those are really the only 2 options, you know?
Yeah. Or hang out there because you force them to, and then your relationship suffers. And that's what I was worried about.
That's a ticking time bomb.
Exactly.
I mean, only a matter of time before the dog goes, I can't take it anymore.
Right. And that's what I was telling him was like, you know, could you like, is it theoretically possible to make this dog sit here? Yeah, but like at what cost? That's not something that we want to do. We want this dog to understand that the walk, number one, should be an enjoyable thing. The dog should have, you know, like he should be structured enough with the heel and everything that it becomes a fruitful time for him to like not only be outside and enjoy life, but also to learn how to like be calm and be present and just exist without always needing a thought taking over his head one after another. But also that if something's going on, dad's got your back. I'm not going to make you sit next to this dog. I'm not going to like hold you to something that's unfair or unrealistic, because ultimately you just end up shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. You know, I've got a video on that topic, actually. I'm Consider the Dog. It's called Stop Disagreeing with Your Dog. And it's all about like, you know, people who have a reactive dog and they're walking by, for instance, another dog who is an unknown dog who, I mean, maybe it's barking behind a fence, who knows? And they're trying to keep that dog in that straight line on that sidewalk, walking right next to that fence going, it's okay, it's okay.
Right.
What do you mean it's okay?
Yeah, no, it's not.
Threatening you guys. Why are you trying to convince the dog that isn't a threat when we all know it's a threat?
Right.
Stop. Just why don't you just say, you know what? I agree with you. That dog is a threat. Let's go over here.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. A lot of
having that connection and saying, you know what? I see the world the way you see it. I see that's a threat too. If you never agree with your dog, if everything your dog perceives as a threat, you always try to convince them it's okay.
Right.
How is a dog ever supposed to know when it really is? You know, how many dog trainers out there, for instance, tell people, don't let your dog meet other dogs on the walk. When your dog's on leash, don't let them greet dogs you don't know, right?
Yeah.
All of them, right? And it's good advice. Why? Why do we tell them that? Well, we tell them that because we know that other dog could be potentially dangerous. Yet, when our dog shows signs of uncertainty, when it's approaching another dog head on, we try to convince them it's okay.
Yeah. Yep.
We're lying to them. We know it's not okay. That's why we don't let them meet. So why are we trying to convince our dog it's okay? Why don't we teach our dog, hey, I see that as a potential problem. You see it as a potential problem. So let's, as a family, come up with a plan of how we deal with potential problems.
Right.
You're never going to remove all threats from the dog's world. No. You're never going to remove all things that make the dogs feel uncertain. So you have to say, when you do feel uncertain, here's a healthy way of dealing with it.
Right. And when we talked earlier,
dog training doesn't do that. They just say, no, but you're in heel. So regardless of whether you feel uncertain or not, you got to stay in heel. And the dog goes, well, then my only option is to bark and lunge and make sure that dog doesn't come near me.
Yep.
Because I have to deal with this emotion that I'm feeling.
Right. Yep. I feel like a lot of times I find myself explaining that kind of thing to like a client or just in my own head if I'm like writing out a blog post or something, to where it's, you know, you almost like, something I say a lot is you can't really blame the dog. Considering the circumstances, I would probably do the same thing. From the dog's perspective, like it makes sense what they're doing. I get it. And so now you have to ask yourself, I as an owner, what can I do to make this better? What can I do to make this different? And people don't always think of things that way. I think a lot of it has to do with this like new marketing style that it's like, hey, all the time, no questions asked, no BS, no whatever, like just straight up obedient. And I'm like, yeah, but your dog has to trust that you have their interest in mind. And even if that's the reality, which of course, like I'm sure it is, but
people have it in theory, but they don't know how to execute
exactly. So the dog is unclear. So the dog is like, wait, but dad said like don't move, but I don't know, and I think that that's definitely an important thing to bring up because advocating for the dog is something that I don't hear enough. Or sometimes I'll hear it, but people get confused as to like, well, if you're supposed to advocate for your dog, then how can you also pressure them within a training program? I'm like, well, of course, I have to get toward the objective. What training is, the dog needs to learn how to be less reactive or more stable or more focused or more patient or whatever, or just generally trained. But that's not the same thing as when stuff is really just outside of the realm of like, okay, this is acceptable. I need you to just hang out and chill. Then let it move, get him out of there and help him understand I'm here for you. It's like you were saying, like, let the dog know that you're listening back. There has to be a certain fairness so that they understand that I don't need to make this move because, this guy's going to take care of it.
And when the dog understands that you recognize what they see as a threat, that you also recognize it as a potential threat, then they're more likely to trust your guidance.
Right.
But if you're acting like it's no big deal, and the dog goes, well, why the hell would I listen to you? Yeah. This is obviously a dangerous situation, and you're totally oblivious to it. So I cannot trust your guidance whatsoever. Yeah,
it's like
you're in a parallel universe right now.
It's like they see ghosts, and like we act like we don't see ghosts.
Exactly. Like there's like not even ghosts. Like there's like legitimately like a lion escaped from the zoo and it's standing right in front of you baring its teeth, and you're just gonna walk straight at it like it's okay. No, it's not okay. It's not okay. And it's okay to feel fearful. It's okay to feel uncertain, but let's make sure that when you feel that way, that we have a healthy way of reacting to it.
Right.
For me, how my dog feels in a situation is more important than what my dog does in a situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what they do is going to be driven by how they feel. Okay. And then what happens is when the dog learns they can rely on you, they don't get so stressed. They go, oh, there's a dog, but I don't have to worry because I'm with a human that gets it. So I can stay relaxed. But if they don't feel like they're with a human that gets it, then they start triggering their stress the moment they see that dog because they're like, man, here's a dog. I'm stuck on a leash with this bozo who has no idea what's going on.
Right. It's funny. I tell people that all the time too. I feel like it's cool to hear you say it, that it's like, how a dog feels will directly influence what they do. What they know how to do is one thing. How they feel in the moment is a different thing. And sometimes you'll start to see this like mix of those two things. And what I notice too is when an owner doesn't get it or when they are actively just pushing the dog through it anyway, it's more pressure than if the dog, like sometimes I'll sit and just write about like, what would a dog do if there wasn't the owner? It's just a dog outside. He'd run.
Yeah.
But exactly. If he's stuck on a leash, you've eliminated that option. So of course the dog is reactive. It's like not only now is this dog out here and the lion has already escaped from the zoo. That's problem A. But problem B is dad's here. It's not just a matter of me surviving. This guy's here too. And I'm stuck to him. And like, now I've got even less options than I would with just me being loose and a tiger.
I'm stuck to this guy who thinks that this lion is a pussycat.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a huge part of it. And again, it just comes down to seeing the world through your dog's eyes, right. Seeing the world from their perspective and just saying, but as far as this whole thing about, how do you reconcile advocating the dog for the dog with also like, pushing them when needed. Mm-hmm. Well, it's, again, I always tell people, I think the biggest, I don't want to say myth, but one of the things that gets perpetuated in dog training that I think is so wrong is this idea, you hear it all the time. Oh, your problem is that you treat your dog like a child. How often do you hear that, right?
But then I would challenge that. I would challenge that
wholeheartedly with that statement.
Yeah.
Your problem is that you don't treat your dog like a child.
Because at least you'd give your child rules.
Rules. Most people treat their dog maybe like an infant.
Right.
But if they treat their dog like maybe a 5-year-old,
right,
it'd be in a way better position. And what do we do with 5-year-olds? I have a 5-year-old son. Mm-hmm. And there are times where I know he needs to have experiences that are good for him, and he's resistant to those experiences. Mm-hmm. But I know that if I want him to grow up and to be a well-adjusted, healthy adult, I need to put a little bit of pressure on him to have those experiences. Mm-hmm. We go to the soccer field to play soccer, and he's a little bit nervous, and I go on the field with him, and then I disappear into the background. and it's a little bit stressful for him. But I know that if I just let him cling to me, that he's not going to grow up into a healthy adult.
Right.
And sometimes pushing them outside of their comfort zone is part of advocating for them.
Yeah, little micro doses of stress help you learn how to tolerate more stress.
And done in the right way and for the right reasons. And by the way, this isn't a thing of like positive training versus
no.
This is psychology. This is psychology.
And even good positive-based trainers know this, because positive-based training can come with stress too, right? And the best positive-based trainers know this, that you have to sometimes ask for more, and sometimes that's going to be stressful, right? And so there's nothing that's incongruent about those two things if you're approaching it in the right way.
Right. And that's what I try to tell people is, it's training by its very nature, just like schooling it's going to be stressful. Just change in and of itself is going to be stressful. Dogs are creatures of habit, just like us, even if the whole process is purely food-based. I mean, one thing that I wanted to touch on, because we talked about board and trains a while back when we were talking about like the deaf dog and my feral dog and stuff like that, was it's just for younger trainers to be clear. The crazy thing about board and trains, and definitely make sure to explain this to a client if you feel that for whatever reason the board and train's the way to go and they're unsure, make sure that they understand an obedience program, a board and train, isn't just teaching commands. There's all the stuff that you need to do on the back end just anyway, frankly, but that help the dog, kind of through osmosis. Like the feral dog, just having him in the room with the other dogs in their crates, just being around, just going on rotations with other dogs, just going on walks. And even if like before, like these days he plays in groups, which and everything is fine. But before all that, just feeding all at the same time and seeing that, oh, this is kind of what the routine is. And you see him start to find his little place in there, so to speak. All that stuff does a lot for them. And it really kind of shows them, it kind of shows them the way a little bit. And, and that's something that I wanted to bring up too, was like, make sure that you understand obedience is one thing, but relationship, environment, socialization, all this stuff, routine, it creates the complete picture of what a trained dog should have at their disposal as far as like tools to add to their belt.
Yeah.
All righty, guys. We want to thank everybody for listening. We have our special guest, Tyler Muto, here on the Dog Trainers Podcast. We want you guys to make sure you guys follow what he is up to and what he's doing. So go ahead and check him out on Instagram at Tyler_Muto. Or also check out his project, Consider the Dog, at consider_the_dog. And go ahead and check them out at considerthedog.com as well, where you guys can get a lot of great content. Some of it free, some of it paid, but you guys will definitely have a lot better insight in dog training approaches. If you guys have behavioral cases, I think that will definitely give you guys a huge upper hand in learning how to deal with those specific cases. Again, Tyler, we want to thank you so much for being here on the podcast. If you were going to say one thing to some dog trainers who are aspiring, what would you tell them?
Learn how to listen.
Beautiful.
Yeah, learn how to listen to the dogs, to the clients, to your teammates, your staff, your wife, your kids.
Learning how to listen. That's the only way we learn, right? Thank you guys so much. If you guys like this podcast, please go ahead and like us, whatever platform you're on. We are on all major podcast providers, and we're also here on YouTube. So please leave us a comment and subscribe. If you guys have any questions, please go ahead and write us at dogtrainerspodcast@gmail.com. And also, last but not least, we're going to go ahead and make sure you guys add us to the UNTAMEDDOGCO on Instagram or CANISBEHAVIOR on Instagram. Again, thank you so much to our special guest, Tyler Muto, and we hope to have you back soon one of these days, man.
Yeah, I'd love to. Just let me know.
All right. Really appreciate you, man. You have a great rest of your night.
Have a good one, man. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers for dog trainers or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
We'll see you next time.